Hekmatullah bides his time in jail in Kabul, where journalist Jeremy Kelly and a film crew working with Four Corners found him in apparent good humour and good health. In this exclusive interview, the former sergeant said that in line with Islamic tradition, he hopes the soldiers' families will forgive him and allow him to get out of prison.
What would you do if you were released, Hekmatullah?
Former Sergeant Hekmatullah told Four Corners that his motive for murdering the three soldiers was a film he'd seen depicting the burning of copies of the Quran by the Americans and cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad.
I'm hoping you could explain why you did this action.
How angry
were you at seeing those pictures?
Do you believe that was his real motive?
No. Look, this man was, again, this is evidence of his ability to lie. Remember, he was interrogated for 3 months before he actually confessed to having done it. So he's just a liar.
So why do you think he did it?
Oh, he's probably trying to deflect the intention away from the fact that he was Taliban.
What do you believe?
That he deliberately joined the ANA to do what he did.
And did he do so as a member of the Taliban?
I believe so, yes. Based on documents that I've read since, a spur of the moment attack is not conceivable, considering that he had in place money and people who were able to get him out and over the border into Pakistan.
The former sergeant denies he's Taliban, although he admits the Taliban helped him escape. He also claims he was tortured while under interrogation in Pakistan.
Can you explain what the torture was?
بس په داسې کې ډنډې تیرې کینه د لاسونه چلته بند کړي شو سره بس بدلته د پښو منځ کې په ډنډه تیر او بس په دا رقم ټول سره پروت یې بس بیواله تر باندې وی خلک نه د سیاوار شي لکه موږ تاسو بیلچه چې ده یو ورځ خالي ماته یو سزا راکړه سر به په سطل په وبوره چخنه سطل د وبوړ کړو.
He says that when he was captured he was tortured. Does that concern you at all?
No.
In the 2 years since his son died, Hugh Pote has methodically investigated the circumstances of the soldiers' deaths. He believes the deaths resulted from a serious failure of planning and intelligence, and that insufficient force protection measures were mandated by senior commanders. He rejects the notion that the attack by Sergeant Hekmatullah was opportunistic and couldn't have been prevented.
It was planned. The evidence on the prosecution file for Hekmatullah clearly says it was planned. The Afghan National Army report itself into the incident shows that it was a planned terrorist attack.
When an investigation team went to Wahab shortly after the shooting, they were joined by Brigadier Roger Noble, the lead ISAF officer heading efforts to counter the insider threat in Afghanistan. He would later conclude,
"The worst sort of guy is Hekmatullah, and the reason is he thought about it. He had that afternoon to watch, and he watched the mobile picket. He tactically prepared for the attack, and he tried to incite further violence post-incident as he went over the wall. He was quite calculated in that."
The only people who said that it was a spur of the moment thing were the Australian High Command, because the appropriate force protection procedures had not been mandated.
In other words, it was a serious failure of intelligence.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look at the result.
In September 2013, Defence handed down its own internal report into the murder of the 3 soldiers.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming.
It concluded that there had not been a failure of intelligence prior to the mission.
Attack. The inquiry officer found there was no intelligence available to Australia or coalition to suggest there was a specific insider threat at Patrol Base Wahib, nor any information to prompt concern regarding the individual Hekmatullah.
However, it noted that before setting off for Wahab, the soldiers had limited information about the base, which meant that the platoon commander decided where his men should camp only after they arrived.
It would be usual for the 2 armies to have separate areas within the patrol base. However, given the terrain and the infrastructure, the Australian commander determined this was not possible.
When the shooting started, none of the watchtowers overlooking the camp were occupied by Australian soldiers, and a single roving picket was guarding the camp. He was dressed in PT gear with body armour. The Army brass singled this out for criticism.
The inquiry officer found having a single roving picket was not adequate in the circumstances on the 29th of August 2012. The inquiry officer identified a shortfall in the decision-making and actions that permitted soldiers to wear gym gear underneath their body armour. 2 Australian soldiers have since been disciplined over the picket's inappropriate dress.
The diggers who were disciplined were Platoon Commander Lieutenant Dominic Lopez and Sergeant Adam Burke. But according to those who've served in Afghanistan and commanded troops there, this criticism has little basis in reality.
The boys were sweating so bad, as you can imagine. We're sleeping under a tarp on stretchers, you know, you got to wind down, you got to air your feet, you got to kind of air the body. Nah, there's no way, you know. I'd love to see that, yeah, the brass that's pointing the finger, go out and do it, yeah.
Wearing PT kit, I think that's spot on. It means they can rest properly. The matter of whether the guardian angel was or was not in uniform, frankly, I know there might have been a policy to say so, but it really doesn't matter, does it? If he's got his weapon and body armour, what more does he need? Whether he's wearing a pair of shorts or a pair of long trousers, who cares? Frankly, it's irrelevant.
Much more damning was the inquiry officer's conclusion that only the minimum force protection arrangements had been set in place, and his criticism of the failure to segregate the Australian and Afghan troops.
This included not setting up a secure area for Australians where they were separated from the Afghan National Army soldiers, and not restricting Afghan National Army soldiers' access to the Australian area.
Was it good enough for the minimum force protection arrangements to be implemented at Wahab?
Obviously not. No, the results clearly show not.
For Hugh Pote, his wife Jannie, and the families of James Martin and Rick Milosevic, the Army's investigation was entirely unsatisfactory.
We talked and we all agreed that the investigation report raised more questions than it answered.
Together, the families have battled to overturn the long tradition of the Army investigating itself. They won that battle when a coroner in Queensland agreed to inquire into the deaths. But the shroud of secrecy which Defence has thrown over their evidence to the coronial inquiry has angered them further.
When we went back to Defence to ask those questions, that was when we started to feel that things were, doors were being closed, and, you know, the old closing ranks.
Where there's no transparency, it follows that there's no accountability. Defence have never had to submit to civilian court before or civilian oversight, and they take great exception to it on this occasion, which is why they're being so obstructive and uncooperative with this particular inquiry.
For the families, the job of investigating what occurred and why has been made much harder by the blackouts imposed on some evidence by defence. These redactions have only been relaxed after pressure from the coroner.
This is the type of report the families received. Yes. All right, look at the redactions. Everywhere you go, everything's redacted. Now, we'll look up the same pages on what's in the brief of evidence, which is nowhere near as heavily redacted as that. Now, that's page 12. There's page 12 in what will become publicly available.
So, yes. Okay.
There's a bit of a difference, isn't there?
Yes. What does that tell you?
That there's no justification whatsoever for that. I think it's an absolute insult and an outrage to give families of fallen soldiers a document of that nature.